most of the drugs never ever make it past that stage.
So you're administering these compounds, and are you
Yes.
looking for the toxicity levels, essentially? Is that what the main thing is?
Absolutely. So you might be working with these animals, for 2 months, 3 months, or a month. And then at the end of that study, you're the one doing a necropsy on them.
So everything gets euthanized, beagles, rats, basically by the end. It's just how it goes.
That's just how it goes.
Why is it beagles? I've heard the beagle thing before, but I thought that was maybe just one study that used beagles. Is there a reason that they're always using beagles?
To my understanding, it's because they're very docile and very easy to work with. And I believe they train them from the company that we get them from. I mean, you can Google it. It's a big company. Marshall Farms is one of the big ones. There's a couple other ones. And the thing is, what people need to understand, these facilities are massive and they breed more than beagle dogs. They breed all kinds of animals. And then the whole welfare thing, the ethics of cattle slaughter. She wanted to improve how those animals are handled and treated during that entire process. And so, yeah, that had a major impact on me because it's doing the right thing. I saw an ad in there for Burmese pythons, and I'm probably about 11 or 12. So he goes down and he comes out with 2 massive handfuls of baby Burmese pythons. And he's just like, take your pick.
Whether or not you keep animals, it is undeniable that animals play a fundamental role in our culture. And this episode today, we discuss that on quite a deep level. I will say there's some parts of this episode that may be disturbing to some people who are listening. We talk about essentially euthanasia and death of some animals, and I'll discuss that in a second. But today I'm speaking with John Kinney, who is a longtime reptile keeper out of Ohio. And this episode is really his story, how he got into reptile keeping, how he was an avid reptile keeper, just like many of us. But really in the middle part of his story, he totally fell out of favor with reptile keeping and really saw it as an unethical practice. And now he's back to it just in the last 4 or 5 years. And we talk about how he brought himself back and how he practices herpetoculture today to make it more palatable to his ethical point of view. But the middle part of this conversation, we discuss animal sacrifice, animal welfare. We discuss the protocols that are used in pharmaceutical companies to test drugs. John had a role in that as working at a pharmaceutical company, and this really changed his perspective on the amount that we use animals for in our daily practice, not passing judgment on it one way or the other, but I think it is a really important part of this conversation. And that's the part that will maybe potentially be disturbing to some people. So if you are someone who is easily saddened by the discussion of death or animals dying, then you may want to skip through that part. But we also discussed Temple Grandin and the impact that she had on animal welfare in the ranching community, and how that can be implemented into our own spaces with reptile keeping in our own home. So we discuss so much in this episode. I can possibly list everything we do cover today, but it is such an important conversation. And it really, again, we're looking at the importance of being a conscientious person, not only to the animals that you keep, but just the world around you, and how important awareness is when we are doing something like keeping animals in captivity. I think it is so crucial. So without anything further, let's jump into this episode. Enjoy. Awesome. Well, John, thank you for being on the podcast. We've stayed in touch for a long time. We'll kind of get into how we knew each other originally a little bit later, but I would love to start with you started keeping reptiles in the 80s, and you have a very similar story to everybody, is basically starting with maybe not starting with a Burmese python, but having a Burmese python in your home at a very early age from a child. And I think that just shows you how far the reptile industry has come, because back then that was considered quite a normal thing. And I would love to I would love to unpack that a little bit, because of how crazy it seems now to send a 12-year-old boy home with a python that can get 15 plus feet.
Yeah, totally, for sure. And first, it's just an honor and a pleasure to be here, Dylan. I appreciate that. I really feel like this is something I was born into. I can't really explain it. At a very, very young age. As early as I can remember, probably about 2 years old, 3 years old, there was something in me about animals, extremely drawn to them, very curious about them, and specifically like reptiles, just, kind of jumped out at me. But the whole world was just this big, flashy, bright place, and everything that I was interested in, was definitely with animals. And so it happened at a very young age, and I remember my first couple animals that I kept, I think I caught a garter snake outside my house, and I had it in like this little cardboard box with this very big top. And within a day, he was gone.
Yeah.
My parents went and they bring him in the house, and he escaped. And then, I remember my next reptile was a green anole, but poor, and again, I was probably 3 or 4. Probably not the best idea to give a 3 or 4-year-old kid that animal. And, of course, it was just in a aquarium with black gravel,
Hmm.
a rock, maybe a water dish, trying to feed it mealworms. And, everything since then has just been, kind of a progression of learning. But, as I got older, I mean, that passion never died. And there's a place called Allwood Audubon Center, and I became very involved with that. So this was, kind of coming on later. And this is the 70s, mind you. So we're talking like 75 up to about 76. And so I volunteered there, and they did an adoption program where they would give you an animal, and you were this, they put your name on it. This animal's adopted by, and they had quite a few snakes. I had a corn snake. That was my responsibility. We had a blue racer, of course, black rat snakes, Eastern milk snakes. We had, I think it was a fox snake. I was thinking it was a northern pine snake, but it was a fox snake. And of course, we had a Massasauga, timber rattlesnake, and copperhead. And it was a great program, So, every week we would be responsible for going in, cleaning the cages, feeding them, doing all those types of things. And that just really sparked it. And I lived practically there. I was there every weekend during the school year. And summers, I spent my entire summers down there.
And it's still a functioning center, right?
It is still a functioning center. And it's not quite the same, to be fair. I mean, they still do, they don't have nearly as many animals, it has definitely changed, over the years. But it is still there. And I still go down there from time to time. But so, yeah, and I think my parents, signed off that it was okay for me to be down there. And I learned from a naturalist. His name was Paul Noob. And I would spend so much time with him and, out in the field a lot, doing hikes, doing educational things, not only with just reptiles, but with like birds and all kinds of animals. But, reptiles are just always there, and specifically snakes. Like, I don't know what it is, just snakes have been my thing. Like, that's just what I've been the most into and interested in of all the reptiles. And I've kept a lot of different reptiles. I mean, I've kept more than snakes. I've had turtles and lizards and just probably the same thing you've had, growing up over the years. So it just kept a progression. And then I don't know if I have to remember, I think it would have been around 1978. My dad told me if I got really good grades, I could get a snake. And that's the thing. Like, back then, you go to the mall, and we had a place called Dr. X Pets, and everything was in there. They had reptiles from all over the world and a lot of snakes. I would see, a lot of stuff today, that you would not want to see in a pet shop. Emerald tree boas, Asian red-tailed rat snakes, of course, boas, all these different animals. But I always wanted one. And what I remember about Dr. X Pets too, this is crazy. Like, it was right next to, one side of it was a video arcade, and the next side of it was a nightclub. But I remember one time they had their front window, like the puppy dog in the front window. Yeah. It was filled with boa constrictors, adults, baby. There must have been 15, 20 animals in this thing. That's not good. But they were just in there crawling around,
Such a different time.
Just, way different, and this is like coming into the 80s, But anyway, I was second grade, and we had just moved. And I remember coming home, and I remember what my dad was saying about my grades. And so I walked back in the bedroom, and I tried to play it off, because out of the corner of my eye, I saw an aquarium, and there was a water bowl in there, and I could see it was a big Florida king snake. So, and that was like, at the time, I just raved about king snakes. I loved them because I'd spend my summers in Florida as a kid. And do a lot of just independent herping down there. I would capture stuff while I was down there, like especially anoles, geckos, snakes. And while I would stay there, I would keep them and then let them go, when I would return home. So that's what kind of started off bringing stuff really into my house, was that. And as with any kid, keeping animals at a young age, it's a huge, huge learning curve. So that started off, but yeah, so that's kind of a long leadway into ball python. So or not ball pythons, Burmese pythons. And so that by this point, I probably have, I don't know, 10 animals I'm keeping. I have, black rat snakes. I've had a few racers, garter snakes, of course. And I had a buddy, and he was real into snakes too. So I kept like Florida kings. I had Eastern kings. He was real into California kings. And by this time, we had started delving into like boas and pythons. Um, and we would trade back and forth. He was real big into Colombian rainbow boas, you know. But we started finding our animals through Trading Post, which is a newspaper periodical. I know Chad mentioned something he had, and it was a newspaper that would come out every week. And I mean, or maybe was it every week or every month? And it was under a weird category, and you would look for them, and sure enough, there'd be king snakes for sale. Just you could think about pretty much anything. If I'm not mistaken, I remember sometimes seeing a lion or a tiger offered in there.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and it's not really that much of a surprise. So I saw an ad in there for Burmese pythons, and I'm probably about 11 or 12. And by this time too, I had a whole separate room that my dad and I helped build. Big wooden enclosures. I had one in there for my boas and stuff like that. And so I saw an ad for Burmese pythons, and I'm like, okay, call him up, make an appointment. I remember driving down to the house, knocking on the door, going in there. And the first thing I noticed this guy had, and he had built his enclosures from like old furniture pieces. So like one was a big like cabinet TV stand that he had converted, and he had a Ringles cobra in there. And I remember this thing because every time he would walk by, this cobra would follow him from end to end. And he's like, "Oh yeah, you called about the Burmese pythons?" And I said, "Yeah." So he goes down and he comes out with two massive handfuls of baby Burmese pythons. And he's just like, "Take your pick."
Wow.
So I grabbed a Burmese python. Yeah. And that's how I came to get, a Burmese python.
And just a hatchling at this point, just a small.
Yeah. And I mean, a Burmese python hatchling is not necessarily small.
Yeah. You're still talking 2 feet or something.
Yeah. It's big compared to a lot of the other baby snakes that we start off with. So I grabbed it, and, there wasn't the whole like albino, the morphs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they were pretty much like, you had your dark phase and the more of the light phase, or the hypo phase, I guess you would call it. I grabbed the one that lighter. I like that bright brown pattern that they had. It really struck to me. And then my buddy, he got a nice big female, and she was more of a dark, but he bought his from the same person at a different time. Cause I said, "Hey, go down there. This guy's got, he's got everything. What do you see what's in his living room?" And I mean, he had animals all over the place. So that's how we came into the Burmese pythons. And
did you have a concept of what you were buying, really? Like, I mean, obviously you understood it was going to be a big snake, but like, did you really know like what you were getting into?
Yes and no.
Okay.
To be honest, because I had read about them. I read about, because I think they're pretty much one and the same. Indian python, Burmese python they look almost identical.
Yeah.
And they're probably pretty much I would say they're like an Eastern king and a Florida king. Just as you go down different regions, they take on different characteristics, just based on where where they're living.
Yes. Yeah.
And adapting to. But no. And I never power fed my animals or anything like that. I mean, the goal wasn't to, it wasn't to get them as big as they can, quickly as possible, that type of thing. I just did what kind of came naturally, but yeah, you start to realize relatively quickly what you're dealing with. And I mean, they're great snakes. They really have a good temperament. They're, they can be a little bit moody depending upon their individual personality. But my animals, they have a strong feeding response. That's what you had to really, you would understand that. That's pretty much what you had to, you knew you had to work with. But, we found ourselves building bigger and bigger and bigger enclosures for, my boas. Cause I think by the time I was 14 or 15, I had, the Burmese, I had two, and my buddy and I, we would trade back and forth. And I had two Burmese pythons. One was about 9 foot and the other was about 11 at that point in time. And then my boas were pretty big. I had an 8 foot and a 10-foot boa constrictor. Those are big, big animals for a 14-year-old kid to have.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Big, powerful animals.
Big, powerful animals. And we did, projects at school, book reports and stuff in biology class. And my buddy and I, we would just tag team. We would, hey, let's bring this in, let's bring this in, from his collection or, what I was keeping. And we would do a show and tell type thing. And it was a lot of fun. And I mean, a lot of learning in the process as well.
Yeah.
And
That's
we
awesome.
also, yeah, and we didn't, back then we belonged to what was called, well, here where I live, it was Greater Dayton Herpetological Society. And so they would hold a meeting every month and then they'd have a big event every year. But you could go there and buy, trade, that type of thing. That's just kind of how it was set. It was just a group of people keeping reptiles, sharing information, and, because that's what we were interested in doing.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
Yeah.
your story, I mean, besides probably having a lot more animals than many people who also loved reptiles growing up, but it's a similar sentiment. You're kind of getting attracted to keeping these animals and working with them and being fascinated from them. But where your story, I think, changes is you actually went through a period where you completely got yourself out of the hobby and actually even take it one step further, didn't think it was the right thing to do at all. So
Yeah.
I would love to kind of start to dig into that. So you have this collections, pretty typical story, people growing up, having lots of animals, and then something changed and you reversed the position completely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. So, that period where I had those animals and I've always been most interested in what they do, um, observing them in their natural state and learning from them, studying their behavior, all those types of things. And I was really passionate about queen snakes, because I still am. I would love to set up a nice vivarium with queen snakes and do it up and I had those for a while and, with everything else, very complicated animal because they eat specifically soft shell crayfish.
Mm.
So I'd find myself going to the bait shop and getting soft craws. And so, I've got these animals and they're seasonal, some of them because I'm capturing and releasing and they've had, all my animals are eating live. And I was also coming into a time when my social life, junior high school, coming into being a freshman in high school and things are changing, social life, that type of thing. And, you start becoming interested in meeting, having a girlfriend. There weren't a lot of girls, I'd say, around that were liking reptiles and stuff. So, I mean, and I was involved, very heavily involved in athletics and sports, and then of course, and even though my parents encouraged me, my dad had a really big influence on me and I have, he took me on fishing trips and, hunting trips and stuff like that. But yeah, I just reached a point, and so the social life kicked in. But as I started learning more and more about animals and their behavior, and then just like working with them, I had to work with mice at Allwood because you fed all our snakes mice. We had our own breeding area and, of course, rats. And I would work with the birds of prey there, feed them and stuff. But for my own collection, there was a point, and my animals were big, and they became really expensive to feed. Because when you have when you have a 10-foot boa constrictor or 11 or 12-foot Burmese python, I mean, you're either feeding them a lot of rats or you're trying to find rabbits. And, the mindset was for me, feeding live was at that time was the most naturalistic thing for them to do. And I never did unsupervised feedings. I mean, and it was always over, like really quick. But I remember one time I needed a big prey item to feed my Burmese python, and I went up and bought a rooster, and it was a Bantam rooster, young, and it was just the cutest thing to me in the world. I'm like, oh, and I put him in there, and of course, naturally, what happens, but there was just this sense like, wait a minute, so that really started to bother me because I really do love all animals. And back then it wasn't feasible with what the space that I had. And I never really had more than probably 10 or 12 animals at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But to raise your own food that way and then, euthanize it beforehand, that just wasn't my mindset. But I didn't have the ability to raise my own feeders at all. And it got really expensive going to the pet store, buying multiple rats, and then trying to find larger prey items for my snakes. And then the whole feeding of live, and then so it was a combination of that, and it just started really tugging on my heartstrings. And I thought, man, this, I don't know, So I started downsizing, and the last thing that I did end up getting rid of, I believe, was my larger snakes. I had those for the longest because they were a lot harder to find a home for.
Right.
And so, yeah, just and knowing what I know now, because I do the same thing now with pretty much all my animals. So I know Idris, my boa, when he wants to come out, and he'll come out 3 or 4 times a week because he'll be at the glass and he'll just wait for me to open it up. And, I set him up with his PlayStation, whatever, and he comes out and explores around my whole room. So I was doing the same thing with my big constrictors back then, and they need a lot of space, a lot of space. And I finally found a guy. He took care of, I think he took at least 3 of them off my hands, and I found a home for another one. And he came over and he saw what I had, and I kept pretty naturalistic. I remember and it was a lot of work, but it wasn't bioactive or anything like that. I think there were a few people doing that back then, but it was it was something I was like, I wouldn't even know how to do that, and it was very rare, like, to see a setup like that. And that was a dream to do that.
Yeah.
I just didn't know enough about plants back then, and really the time, because bioactive does take a bit of time, in my opinion. It's not just throw the plants in, substrate in, and boom, you're done, and you clean up crews, take care of everything. You still need to, in my opinion, you still need to be kind of hands-on with it. But it's got its really, really great benefits for setting up that way. But my enclosures all had, I put newspaper on the bottom, and then I would fill them with natural-looking aquarium gravel. And I put fake plants in there. I built ledges. My Burmese and all my boas, they climbed like crazy. So I had to build really big spaces for that, to at least to give them the ability to do what they did. So he came over, saw how I had that set up, and he took them on my hands. And before I even transferred to the home, I went to his house, and he said, "Hey, I just want your opinion." And I'm like 17, 18, getting ready for college. And I'm like, okay, like, this man is like in his 30s.
Yeah.
And he's asking me what he should do. And I did, because I have so many books, even still, Encyclopedia of, all my little books as a kid, because I, would read all those. But, and I went over and I said, oh, yeah, he built a huge, like, it was like 10 feet long. It was at least like 3.5, 4 feet high. He really took a lot of what he saw that I had. And I didn't have an enclosure that big. I think my enclosure might have been 6 feet, maybe 8 feet, in that range.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had, plexiglass. We built these plexiglass doors with hinges that would swing up and down. So he kind of modeled that off. Now he incorporated like swing out doors, but it was a beautiful big enclosure. And I think he set up newspapers, climbing branches, stuff like that, which is fine, but I at least felt comfortable, like, okay, this guy's going to take good care of this animal,
Yeah.
So yeah. And then I think by the time college rolled around, I had a roommate, and he was into reptiles. And I think maybe into my sophomore year, the remnants of any animal that I kept at that point in time. I had a California king snake and a pair of Amazon tree boas. And, when I graduated, I ended up getting into law enforcement. So I just didn't have time. And, but at that point, like, there was just something tugging on my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, keeping these animals like this, it's not the right thing to do. And I didn't know about, like, I didn't want to pre-kill. I didn't want to have to do that. I'd have, if a snake skipped a meal, I'd be stuck with a mouse.
Yeah.
And I'd end up keeping that mouse for a while. Yeah. And then when you have one that's a gravid female, and then you've got a bunch of baby mice within about a week, and I forget what I did with them. I think I took them down to Allwood and I put them in their colony. I'm sure they probably ended up as feeders at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just had that compassion for them, like, I would never, like I said, I would never leave anything unattended because I knew the dangers of doing that in captivity. Well, I think a lot of people don't understand that. They're like, why didn't the snake just kill it? I'm like, well, they're not going to if they're not in the mood to eat.
Yeah. And now
people ask me all the time. Yeah. People ask me all the time, like, why is it dangerous to do that? And they don't get it. I'm like, because if the snake's not hungry and it's not going to eat, and the animal has a tendency to gnaw, that snake's going to do, the only thing it's going to do is try to avoid it. It might try to strike at it a few times, but not in a sense for the prey drive, for it to eat or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it was just, I don't know, like it just really tugged on my heart, and I thought this isn't right, and I didn't like feeding the way I fed at that point in time, and I just became busier with other stuff, and I just
And,
said, it's
and
time to walk away.
you had also mentioned to me that you spent some time working at a pharmaceutical company. I don't know when that was in your kind of that timeline, but it sounded like that also had an impact on how you feel about just keeping animals in captivity, maybe, or maybe you can expand on that. But I think it seemed like that was a pretty fundamental experience for you. So I've been using the mental performance shot Magic Mind for about 8 days in a row now, and I found it to be super beneficial for me. I've recorded 2 episodes now with taking the shot beforehand, and as far as word finding and staying more engaged and relaxed with the guest, it's kind of taking it to another level. And I also have these sort of tedious tasks that I have to do for my day job. For example, planning an entire week's worth of workouts for my swimmers. That always takes me forever because I'm constantly opening up my phone, scrolling through Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. But when I take Magic Mind beforehand, it keeps me in the zone and I get through those tasks so much quicker. So if you are interested in trying it as well, make sure you head to magicmind.com/animals-at-home. And for the next 10 days, you can receive up to 48% off your first subscription using the coupon code animals-at-home20.
It was very fundamental. And it took a while to lead up to that because I think I've made a career of not having a career, if you want to call it that. I was a deputy sheriff for about 10 years, and I got real into rock climbing. And, climbing provided a lot of opportunity to be involved outdoors, and most of the climbing I did was Red River Gorge, Kentucky. So there's a lot of wildlife down there and a lot of reptiles down there. So I was kind of like the reptile climbing guy at the crag, and snake here, and I'd be the one to get it away and make sure it was safe. And people doing things they shouldn't do, I'd be like, hey, and try to be like, explain that you don't need to do that with this animal if you leave it, just stuff like that. Because some people, their dogs get bit, they take their dogs there, their dogs get bit by a copperhead, different things like that. So I did a bunch of different things, got out of law enforcement. I worked at a mortgage company. I managed a climbing gym. Met my wife at the time at where I worked. Ended up moving to Chicago, and so I went from a mortgage company to working for a veterinary hospital. And I was a vet assistant, vet tech. And so I was doing that, and I was really big into the climbing community. I was still real into climbing at the time, and a really big part of the climbing community there, and working at the animal hospital. And a friend of mine that I climb with, he said, hey, because Chicago, from where I lived, was extremely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
My wife at the time and I were barely squeaking by in Chicago because it's very expensive to live there. And he said, hey, maybe you might be interested in doing what I do. He's like, and you're gonna kind of laugh when you hear this. He's like, hey, I think you might be interested in doing this job. I know you love animals and you like working with animals. There's a position open up, and he kind of explained what it was. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really quite understand because he didn't really divulge a whole lot. He just told me, I know you like working with animals. It might be a job that you would enjoy. And it pays really, really well. So I was like, sure. So I interviewed, and they did show me what they did. And I was like, okay. And then I accepted the job. And so, boom, before you know it, I'm working for a major, major pharmaceutical company. And I don't really want to mention the company. It's very popular. You've seen their advertisements on TV a lot. Everybody sees their advertisements on TV. And I say that because the people that I worked with were very passionate about what they did, and they believed in what they were doing. And to be honest, I was kind of 50-50 on the fence about it. But I went ahead and did it. It was an incredible learning experience, especially after working at the vet hospital. So I ended up at the pharmaceutical company, and I did that for like about 6 years.
And can you tell us a little bit about the role that you had there?
Yeah, I was a toxicology technician. And basically what that means is you are doing studies on animals for prospective drugs to put out on the market. And so you're administering these, chemicals is what they are, these compounds to the animals and stuff. So you get massive, massive amounts of training. You get training on, doing intravenous oral gavage, You're working with mice, rats. Some of the technicians work with, there's a whole bunch of levels of like qualifications as to what you can build up in your repertoire. And the thing is, they encourage you, that you're kind of a self-made person. Does that make sense? Like they want you to progress at your pace, but they tell you the more skills you have there, the more important your role will be and the more secure you will be in the company type thing. And that's, I get that. So, I mean, I did reach a certain level and it was very challenging along the way, but so digressing, you get, if once you build up your training and they feel like you're good to do like the basics, like let's just say you're trained in oral gavage of rats. Okay. That you will get your own rat study. And that's a completely different thing. But every single day, there is what they call the initial baseline. So the people were putting the compounds together, all these medicine or whatever you want to call them, but they're compounds, and you have chemists that are making up these things, and they're already studying, what it is, but they're just making tweaks and adjustments and stuff like that. And the amount of data that they collect from these studies, and this is just one pharmaceutical company. And there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and there's a lot of ones that aren't as big as the one that I work for. And there's a few that are as big as the one that I work for. But every day, typically you start off in two different places. The first thing you do is you dose beagle dogs, and we work with beagles. And it's a big colony, that come in, and typically they are puppies. I mean, they're not very old. They're like 6 months old to start. And so you have these cute beagle dog puppies that you're working with. And by that time, I already knew a lot about rats. They're very affectionate, very intelligent animals and that type of a thing. So you start off your morning doing the base colony of beagles, then you go up to another lab, and then you're doing the rodents, which is basically rats. So it was beagle dogs and rats primarily. And we did have, like I said, we did work with mice, rabbits, and other things, just depending upon the stage of where that is that they're testing. And most times, most of the drugs never ever make it past that stage. So you
so
start
you're
off
administering these compounds, and
Yes.
are you looking for the toxicity levels? Essentially, is that what the main thing is?
Absolutely. So the initial collection is all blood, and those the dog colonies that do that. I mean, they're there. I think those animals are there for 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years. The rat studies they're euthanized at the end of the day, every day. But after you do your dose and you have these baselines done, then you're collecting blood all day, and then that gets processed. You do the separation, send it off to the lab, and then they're looking at it, all the top guys that really know what they're doing. Because
Right.
there's so much of it that I don't understand, even having done it. And a lot of the people I've worked with, they've advanced, so I'm sure they're probably, up to that point. And this was a job that you didn't need a degree for. So you just needed to have your, be a high school graduate, that type of a thing, but you didn't have to have a college degree in chemistry or, anything like that. So then we had other dogs, beagle dogs and rats and mice and stuff that get an approval, be like, okay, that compound shows some promise. Now we're going to take it to the next level. And that's where you do the real toxicology study. And I'm probably butchering this, for anybody else out there that may have done the same work, because it's been such a long time ago since I've done it. But you do those studies. Those studies last approximately a month, just depending upon what they're looking for. Sometimes they do go longer. I know some of the rat studies went on for 6 months, maybe a year. And when you're talking about that long, you're talking about really, really large rats that you're working with. That at the end of these studies, you do a necropsy. So all the animals have to be euthanized. And you go through necropsy training. So, I mean, there's so many different roles and different responsibilities that you have. So you might be working with these animals, for 2 months, 3 months, or a month. And then at the end of that study, you're the one doing a necropsy on them.
So everything gets euthanized, beagles, rats, basically by the end. It's just how it goes.
It's just how it goes because they analyze everything.
Why is it beagles? I've heard the beagle thing before, but I thought that was maybe just one study that used beagles. Is there a reason that they're always using beagles?
To my understanding, it's because they're very docile and very easy to work with. And I believe they train them from the company that we get them from. I mean, you can Google it. It's a big company. Marshall Farms is one of the big ones. There's a couple other ones. And the thing is, I mean, what people need to understand, these facilities are massive and they breed more than beagle dogs. I mean, they breed all kinds of animals. But yeah, that's because they're very easy to work with. And when they come in, they're already partially trained. So you know, in my mind, like even right now, it's hard to fathom like what they go through to get to the point where because they're trained. Basically, they'll just sit there really still.
Oh, yeah, that's that's hard.
And it is hard. And most of the beagle studies you do are oral gavage, where you're inserting a tube and you put the medicine in that way. And you have a course of control, you have a placebo, you have all these different levels that you're doing. And it doesn't matter. I mean, even if you're not giving the animal, the drug, I mean, they still have to be euthanized and they harvest we collected all the tissue. I mean,
right.
Tissues that you wouldn't even imagine, like just a specific ligament of the knee they want to look at because they literally are figuring out how much, you can take.
Right. And do most of the animals in those studies, whether it's rats or beagles, make it through the studies and then become euthanized, or do some die along the way because they've been poisoned?
Some do not make it through the full length of the study. Now, here's the one, and this is going to tie in to what we're going to talk about here down the road. I have to say that loving animals as much as I do, and the compassion and feeling that I have for them, they get round the clock, super high quality veterinary care. And the people really do they are compassionate and they understand what this animal is giving up. And they get round the clock veterinary care. So if it's determined that this animal never ever should you have an animal just die. Has it happened? I'm sure it has happened. You come in the next morning. We usually work late. We would always have mandatory overtime. Like we worked overtime and shifts. So there was somebody there till at least midnight or 1 because you have to dose and you have to do, you're still collecting all the data and taking blood, and then you're there at like 5 a.m. the next day, depending upon the shift that you're working. I lost my train of thought there.
We're just talking about like would an animal die kind of?
Oh, yes. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, it has happened, but the whole goal is to avoid that happening.
Yeah.
You have the vet techs come in and
they'll euthanize if it's beyond a certain state.
Absolutely. And then that animal will go immediately to necropsy and they'll get all the, they'll collect all the tissues that they need to study, get their data and everything like that. But yeah, round the clock vet care, veterinarians, and I worked with a lot of the veterinarians and the vet assistants and the vet techs that work there. So it's very hard for sure. And but that being said, I mean it's not. This is one of the companies that it's not necessarily absolutely horrific. I mean, yeah, it's hard to stomach it if you kind of get what I'm saying, because knowing what's going to happen, especially with the dogs. Like the main beagle colony, right? That we start off in the morning, they don't get euthanized. I mean, they're there. I mean, the rats at the end of every day, they do get euthanized. So you can imagine we go through. I mean, I can't even. It's astronomical in my head. The figures of
it's millions.
It has to be maybe even beyond that. If you consider this company's been around since the 50s and 60s, and back then the standards aren't what they are today. And it seems like Europe is leading the way in a lot of things because a lot of their standards have filtered over to here, which is a good thing, which is a very, very good thing. But yeah, it's crazy. But that beagle colony though, the base one, I did manage to rescue one of them because we do adopt some of them out. So that's, if there's a carrot at the end of this story, they do try to. They understand the animals, and they are at least giving an opportunity for the animal to retire, and have a good life. And I remember I had one I had my eye on, and I named him Kevin. I named him. He was named after Kevin James because he was just a big goofy. He was cute as can be, and they get a lot of enrichment. I mean, for what they live in, but they're in a big metal thing that's probably 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. Um, and they're in their own cages, and then they get socialization. So there'll be times when we let 5 or 6 of them run around and play together, or there'll be times when just 2 of them are running around and playing together, just depending upon how their cages are set up. And they get round the clock animal husbandry. So not only do they have the vet care, then they have another staff that's completely responsible for the husbandry, where they're checking the water lines, they're cleaning up the waste, changing out what they need to change out. And you're doing a study with this dog, and you pick up this beagle puppy, and he's wagging his tail, and you're holding him and petting him and spraying out his enclosure and everything, and putting him back in. So, I mean, for what it is, they do the best they can to give these animals as much enrichment and a life as possible.
Yeah. Well, and it is sort of the dark reality of. It's an unfortunate thing that sort of has to happen. I mean, you could go down, like, I'm sure there are many medications that didn't have any real reason to be made besides making money, we'll say. And then in that case, that would be a shame to have lots of animal sacrifice to do that. But there are obviously medications that humankind has benefited from, and animal studies are really, there's no way around that, short of doing that to people, which you obviously can't do. So it is it's sort of the dark side of that you don't really think about when you go pick up your prescription.
You don't. And that's when you see, I don't know if you've seen them, I'm sure you have, where they, something in the newspaper, hey, you want to make money? And that's where you have the human trials going on. That's usually
right.
What that is.
Yeah.
But no, you're 100% correct. And that's just the thing, because ever since I was a kid, I would just look at things like and just take it in. Like I remember sitting at a football game with my dad, and we were in Florida. It was a college football game. It was like one of the bowl games. And I was probably, I was young, probably like 9 or 10. And I'm sitting there, and, it was like the opening thing. And all of a sudden, all these balloons go up, and that worried
me. Yeah.
And I asked my dad, I'm like, what happens to those? And he's always like, oh, nature will break them down, da, 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 da. Little did he know that plastics take literally hundreds, if not almost thousands of years to break down.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's just the thing. Like, a simple aspirin or one Tylenol, which has been around. How long has that been around?
Exactly.
A long, long time. And to get to that point where that over-the-counter drug got to where it was, animals went through everything what I just told you for something as big as Humira.
And that doesn't even begin to talk about the drugs that don't make it through those trials, which is probably tenfold of what we see or maybe it's 100-fold of what we see on the shelves.
Almost 100-fold.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Humira, they worked on that for probably 20 years before they got it to where it hit big. And I mean, I kind of gave away the company by saying that drug, but that's okay. Yeah, that was in progress for quite a while. And if I'm not mistaken, they're probably still doing some research on it. They're probably still doing certain studies because they ended up using it it was initially an arthritic medication. But as with anything else, I mean, think of how Viagra started off.
Exactly. There's all off-label use.
Yeah, and that was a byproduct of what they were originally studying that drug for. And so a lot of that stuff is, and I think, they ended up using Humira. They rebranded it, they rechanged the names, but it ended up treating everything from irritable bowel syndrome to, a lot of different things, but it all centered around inflammation.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's been my difficulty, is that I'm maybe overstimulated or over emotional and sensitive to nature and animals. And I do the best I can, but it's a challenge. That was one of the most challenging things I've ever done.
Sorry, you can finish that thought.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah. Did this change your? You came from an animal keeping background, and maybe having a more conscientious thought process when it comes to keeping animals, and I can obviously relate to that very closely. And then, did this whole experience change your opinion on animal rights, or did you have an animal rights opinion before? I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on PETA as well, because if PETA could take a story like that and run with it, and then in many ways they're like, yeah, they're kind of right. Like, this is sort of sad. But as animal keepers ourselves, we are constantly butting up against animal rights. But you kind of have almost a view to both worlds. Did this change your mindset about this?
In terms of keeping animals?
No, just like, yeah, keeping animals, or, we talk about animal rights as this sort of evil sector of society that's we're always fighting against, and they are very antithesis towards us who keep animals. But you have this experience where sometimes the animal rights people are probably right about certain things. I don't know if you have any thoughts about those organizations. Yeah.
I get what you're saying. So, for me, it's like not even for me, it's just kind of like a common sense thing, right? So it just kind of comes naturally. I wouldn't even, it's a living creature. If you want to call it a right, I think it has every right to try to survive as we do. And so, yeah, like the PETA thing, I really honestly think that, somebody at work at the pharmaceutical company thought I was a PETA infiltrator at one point. Because there was a brief study, it was a training study, and these were, fresh beagle dogs, puppies. And it was, they used 3, and it was a study to know what to look for on your study for ataxia, which is, tremors and stuff like that, like seizures and whatnot. So they deliberately, they did this, dose the dogs, and they had, they were obviously shaky, and it really bothered me because we already knew what to look for ataxia. And so I disagreed with it. Now, and this is another thing that I applaud the company for. They have a ombudsman program where if you think, and I knew one of the ladies that worked in that, and I did, and it can be completely anonymous. I just reported, I said, hey, to me, this was kind of borderline. I don't really think it was necessary, And so I reported, and they investigated, and everything was fine. And maybe I made a difference, maybe I didn't. Like maybe they wouldn't do that again. But I thought this is just redundant because we already knew about ataxia and that particular, thing that could happen on a study with a medication. And I really felt like it was unnecessary. And I think, I don't know how, but I feel like they knew that I was the one that reported it just through conversations and stuff that we had,
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't flat out come out and say it was me, but I was just like, well, I disagree. Cause I was talking with one of the techs, and I really respect him. I mean, he was a really great guy. He really cared about what he did, and he loved the animals as much as I did. But he was like, oh no, and I mean, we had a difference of opinion, but I think from that point on, I think it was a little bit strained. But no, I mean, I look at it as a complete common sense thing, and we'll probably circle back to this, but I just feel like we're connected to nature in the natural way things should be. Then I think there's a very obvious disconnect from it, where we elevate ourselves above everything else. And I definitely think that's the wrong approach, because I think, animals have a lot more to teach us. And there's a lot more things that we don't understand that they're capable of, complex things, as not maybe as complex as us, but a lot more complex than what we give them credit for. So PETA is extreme. Okay. And I disagree with a lot of their positions. Nobody should own anything, and everything should be free and in the wild. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, then we all need to take a giant step back 400 years or 500 years or 1,000 years and live like we used to live, tribal, like, nomads or whatever, and live, because that's where we didn't have to have pets. And even then they're like, I think, in the previous episodes, somebody talked about, even back then they did have pets. I mean, Native American tribes had dogs, some
exactly.
of them did. But you want to talk about being, okay, let's just say that time frame. When you're out in nature every day, eking out a living, that's all you had to do was survive. If you don't find food, you go a night hungry, right? Do you really need to have a turtle or a snake?
Exactly.
Yeah. When you're going hunting, let's say you're going hunting for American bison or buffalo, and you're out there and you're waiting, or and then a rattlesnake crawls by you, or a big, bull snake. Do you really need to, you get to experience that every day. And I think that's where we do feel a connection, because we want that. Like I enjoy my enclosures. So I'll come in and sit and relax. This is like on a day that I can't go out to the woods, I can come in here and watch my animals, and it's like being in nature type of thing, and we'll circle back to that too, about space and stuff like that. But, so yeah, I disagree with that approach that no, we shouldn't keep anything. At the same time though, and I know a lot of people are against PETA, and I understand that too, because it's radically extreme. It's a radically extreme approach. But I will give them this one caveat, and that is if they never existed, would we be aware of a lot of the things that are going on? So in a sense, they have elevated us to be better with how we treat animals and keep our animals. That's about all I could say about that, I guess.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, there's obviously an extremist, their tactics can be kind of wild, and they do have an extreme point of view, but sometimes having that as a mirror to us, sort of, like you said, it sort of forces us to go, okay, in some ways they're right about certain things, and we do have to make sure that maybe the space is larger, and like you said, we'll probably get into that later, but I think that's right. And yeah, I can imagine that, because it's quite a journey to go through for yourself, keeping animals, having this conscientious kind of feeling towards them, making sure, like even the balloon story, right? Like I could totally relate to that. That's something I would think as well. You see 1,000 balloons get released into the air. You're like, as cool as that looks, like where did those go? I mean, it does really feel like, it is littering, and it's going to cause problems.
I would walk out of my apartment in Chicago, and it's just one block, and I'd go in the back alley taking the trash out there, and I'd put it in the trash can, and I'd look down the alley, and I would see just garbage, yeah, just loaded, and I'm like, and then it stressed me out. I'm not gonna lie, like, holy moly, what are we doing?
Yeah. Now, eventually you made your way back to reptile keeping, but you'd also mentioned to me before we recorded that you had mentioned the name Temple Grandin. And I wonder if maybe you could let people know who that is if they don't know. And then I would love to see, did discovering her work or listening to her change your opinion of keeping animals, or how did that influence you?
It influenced me because I was just blown away by what she had to overcome. And to be honest, I didn't know a whole lot about her until I worked at the pharmaceutical company. And again, living in Chicago with my wife at the time, we watched a lot of movies. So she knew about it more than I did. And she was like, hey, let's check out this movie. And it was, Temple Grandin. I think, what was her name that starred in it? She did a really good job. So yeah, that sparked my interest in her. And she has a lot of degrees. I know she has a doctorate, I think, in ethology, which it's a branch of zoology where I think, isn't Lori?
Ethology would be like the study of like learning, essentially. Yeah,
behavior, right?
Behavior and learning,
basically. Yeah. So, but she had a lot to overcome. She has autism, and there's so much I've learned, by getting back when I did end up coming back to where I have that stuff that I didn't know when I was keeping when I was younger. But one of the things, she had an overload sensory thing, and it was, she didn't want to touch or be hugged, that type of thing. But at the same time, she needed that. Yeah. Because that's something that we need being nurtured when we're growing up, when we're young, is that affection from our parents and our siblings, It's very difficult when you have a condition that she has, and she invented what they call the squeeze box that gave her a hug and made her feel calm and comfortable. And she actually invented one for other people with the same, issues. And then I kind of fast forward to watching episodes of Bleem, Reptiles and Research, about pygmotaxis. Yeah. We all kind of have that, snakes are notorious. That's what they thrive on. That's what they require they need the ability to secure themselves always. They need to have something to go to and be close to, not 100% all the time. I mean, when they get bigger, of course, and they're more of on the apex line, they're a lot more okay with being out in the open for a period. But at some point, they go back to tight quarters where they want to They want to feel the sides closing in on them. That's where they're, really comfortable. Um, but she, for whatever reason, just connected with animals also. And so she's done a lot of work in animal behavior. Um, and then the whole welfare thing, if you think about, and again, this is an overwhelming thing to think about, stuff that I think about. But the ethics of cattle slaughter or just slaughter in general, the animals that we eat. And something struck a chord with her, and she wanted to improve how those animals are handled and treated during that entire process. Um, and so, yeah, that had a major, major impact on me because it's doing the right thing, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, she's revolutionary in the ranching industry, just essentially creating an environment that keeps the animal more relaxed and more calm. And I would encourage anybody to go. I think she has a TED Talk. I'm sure that's where I've heard her speak before. She was just amazing at coming into a setting and really understanding what the animal is experiencing in that setting, and knowing like she'd be like, okay, that American flag up there, as cool as it looks, it's flapping around too much. That's going to be a stressor, like things like that. And she could set up an environment that would allow the animals to stay calm. And one thing that always sticks out that I learned from her is the animals, they think in pictures, and it's really tough for us to understand that because we think in words typically. And I have a fairly visual memory, but even still, humans, everything is built on top of the language that we speak, and you essentially remove that with animals, and they do have their own language, so to speak, but they also it's a visual environment. It's everything that they're processing is visual for the most part, especially when we're talking about cattle and other animals that are in the ranching setting. So I remember her saying like a horse for a cow is different than a horse with a cowboy on it. That's a different picture. It's a different thing. And for us, we separate it, but it's not exactly two separate things. And so anyway, like you said, this understanding of how the animals are processing the information can have huge impacts on welfare.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we almost picture a horse with a person on it. Like
exactly.
We don't think of horses and the wild Mustangs and running out, in nature. We think of a horse with a cowboy on it or somebody doing equestrian work on a horse. And yeah, she did that. You're right. I mean, it was, if there was a chain hanging down, that should be removed, different things. The way that they're corralled in, she quickly determined, and maybe it's just because of that extra perception that she had, but she could sense, there was a bit of internal turmoil, stress. So it was the way that they were corralled in, and you have to think, the ranchers and not the farmers, but the company that does the processing for us, they have to be scratching their heads like, oh my gosh, this is going to cost us an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
That's what they're thinking about, but, she fought for that to change, which is a good thing because a lot of the major companies now employ a lot of her things that she came up with to reduce that level of stress during that process. In fact, I think there's an entire farm that based everything off her that she had called White Oaks Farm, I believe.
Yeah, White Oaks. Yeah.
And yeah, they supply a lot of the proteins, to like Whole Foods. Because
I didn't realize that they utilized her to set. I knew that they're sort of a regenerative agriculture business, but I didn't realize they used Temple Grandin to set up the environment for welfare as well.
I think largely, if I'm not mistaken, I believe she had a large play, like at least a large influence on the White Oaks Farm and what they do and how they, how they handle farming our animals, And I mean, that's, oh my gosh, it could be a whole, different caveat to that, because I'll be honest, I've contemplated, should I become vegetarian? Then I think, I'll be pescatarian, I think the whole thing, I'm just saying we, as a group of people globally, we have so much convenience and excess that we just don't stop to think where the processes for everything that we do, whether it's the medications we take, the things that we eat, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like we don't really process that because it's just so readily available and it's just so easy to forget about.
Yeah.
That kind of ties into my theory about being disconnected maybe from where we should be in a sense. I'm not saying it's all bad at all, but I think there's a balance that we're kind of out of at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Being involved in, this is going to sound violent, but being involved in the slaughter of animals is something that, that's, I mean, I grew up on a farm. I know what that's all about. I've done it myself, and it changes your perspective of the meat sitting in the styrofoam container.
Absolutely.
And I eat meat as well, but having that experience tells you where the animal comes from, what it's like to do that. And it's it's not a simple thing. Even if you're raising animals to eat for meat, there's still an element of, it is sacrifice. The animal is sacrificing itself for you.
Absolutely. Just digressing a bit. I mean, if you think about this whole process and what we were talking about, PETA, and you say you have a company that's doing it the right way and using implements to reduce stress during the process, and then you have a pharmaceutical company that's doing it the right way, that's really monitoring the animal. And this is another thing, PETA will go in there and they will just take a small sliver. And so that's what's put out there,
yes.
Right? And that, by doing that, okay, for example, let's just say an infiltrator went in and actually filmed a necropsy of a beagle. They're going to say that this animal is being tortured and that this animal's conscious and that this is being done to it while it's still alive. It's not, but the footage would deceive, because, when you do that, when you are slaughtering, the same thing happens in the cattle industry or, whatever, the slaughter aspect of things. There's a lot of energy that's being released, a lot of neurons firing, nerves twitching and stuff like that. They're gone. They are no longer here. They have passed on at that point. The general public's not going to see that. And so, and anybody that wants to change their habits and they want to become a vegetarian or a vegan, I don't have any problem with that, especially if you're doing it for the betterment of animals. By all means, do it. I just feel that, it could be an extreme. If that's your choice, great. But to force it upon everybody is not necessarily the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is just to become aware. You have a choice of the Matrix, taking the red pill or taking the blue pill. But if you know what, you have, that gives you the chance to make better choices.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, like something like white oak pastures is a good example, because their style of farming is actually fixing the land. We're talking about using cattle and grazing animals to make the land better again and re-nourish the soil. And we all know the factory farming, how decimating, how horrible it is for the soil itself. We're like destroying the soil with all the salts and everything. And when you have animals back on that ground to stamp it back together and cycling through where you actually plant crops, it's how the land is supposed to be. So
exactly.
Yeah, if you eat meat and you can find something like that to support, that definitely is ideal.
I'll gladly pay $7-8 for a dozen eggs. I know that people sounds crazy, but I know where I've researched the company that I buy them from, and I support them 100%. But I'm willing to do that, because I know those animals are treated the way they should be, and they're in the environment that they should be in. And I tell you what, they're the best eggs I've ever eaten.
Oh,
the yolks are super bright orange. So, I mean, making those choices can improve your life too.
Totally.
Because the quality you're getting is much, much better.
Exactly. Yeah. My dad has chickens. That's where we get all our eggs. And so I know exactly where they come from. And yeah, my son he could eat 1 million eggs. It's crazy how different the taste is from an actual egg that's from a free range chicken. It's totally different.
It really is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so let's circle back to coming back into herpetoculture, coming back into reptile keeping. And maybe you could let us know when that was, because I think it was more recent than...
Oh, very recent.
Yeah, so talk to me about like what sparked the initial comeback.
Okay. Yeah, it started around COVID, actually,
Okay.
And so like the pharmaceutical company experience... in my mind, I thought I need to make a living, and I don't want to say I justified it, but my approach was, this is going to happen whether I protested or not. I could be a member of PETA, be that extreme, be like, oh, but it's not going to, realistically, it's not going to stop it. The other aspect is, well, maybe in a weird way, even though I'm not in agreement with it, this is my opportunity to, while that animal is here, give it the absolute best I can possibly give it and show that it is actually cared about and nurtured and loved in a way, because you do become close to the animals at points. And that's very difficult because then you have to say goodbye.
Especially beagle puppies. Damn, could they have
Oh
picked a
yeah.
cuter
Well,
breed?
even rats,
Totally,
you
yeah.
they're amazing animals. So COVID hits, and story about that. Um, YouTube, and I was just, YouTube's been around a long time. Never really, I was always out doing things. I was always out climbing or mountain biking, didn't really get into a whole lot of social media. And then COVID hit, and I started watching your channel, I think, of course, and Lean's. A big one that what really started off, to be honest, was the Bio Dude.
Mm.
And he was setting up a bioactive king snake enclosure. It was a California king snake. Well, hits me right, took me right home. And so I'm like, okay. So I was working, and by this time I'm back with another financial company. And there's a pet store down the road, and they had a Florida king snake in there as a baby. And so I must have gone, I would go on my lunch break to see if the animal was still there. And then I come home. And so a month went by. So COVID hit, things got shut down. We were all forced to work from home. I happened to be at that pet store. By that point, he was like 75% off. Nobody was buying this animal. So I bought him, right? And he was a baby, and followed the BioDude's setup. And I mean, this was new in a sense, not keeping snakes, but it literally was like starting all over again. And I feel like I'm a brand new newbie into what I'm doing now. But of course, a lot of how I kept has just been with me the whole time. So a lot of things that I do just seem to come natural. But that's what kind of kicked me back into it. So I got him set up, and let's see, I bought him in May of 2020. So right at the pinnacle of COVID, just boom, everything was going nuts.
Yeah.
February of 2021 rolls around, and at this point, I'm with my fiance. I met her that maybe 2.5, 3 months after I, in my mind, rescued this Florida king snake. She does not like snakes. So flash forward to February of 2021. I'm at another pet store, and there's a spotted python in there, baby spotted python. And I thought, this is crazy. I've never seen a baby spotted python in a pet store before. I've seen him when I was part of the Herpetological Society. Somebody had him, and so I was like, okay. And the same thing happened. I kept tabs on it. I'd go in a month later, 25% off. A month later, 50% off. So I talked to the manager, and I end up buying this spotted python. A month after that, there was the cutest little and I'd never had a desert king snake before. Splendida, the desert king.
Yeah.
So I did the same thing. So now all of a sudden, within the span of 10 months, relatively, I've got 3 animals. All babies. Now the Florida that I bought was now becoming a juvenile because he was growing. And my mindset, so to answer your question, same thing. It was the same approach. And I thought, well, I mean, and I had no idea how big reptiles are now comparatively. But I had the mindset, I'm like, people are obviously still keeping these animals. We haven't shifted to where nobody's keeping anymore. We're keeping them out in the wild. Ideally, when you have an ideology that's in your mindset, like what you're thinking, the way things should be.
Mm.
And maybe you could say I just justified it again, but it's just a childhood passion of mine, and it's just something that's always going to be in me. It's never going to go away. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do this a different way than I kept when I was younger, and give these animals everything that I can give them, and put them in really big. In my mind, I'm thinking, am I saving them? Maybe, but maybe, I took it away from another kid that has to go through the same process that I did when I was younger. I don't know, but. So yeah, that's kind of what kicked it around. I just said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get back into it and give them everything I have. And it's not. There's moments where I'm like, what have I done? Because now I have 7 snakes.
Can you give us an update? Yeah, what do you have now? You mentioned the boa, and what else?
I have a Florida king and a desert king. I have the spotted python, of course. I have a Thai bamboo rat snake. which is the species I never kept before. I'd never kept a spotted python before. I'd never kept a desert king before. It's a king snake. It's not too hard to keep compared to like a Florida king. It's almost very similar. And then of course, once you've had a boa, as I'm sure you understand this 100%, they are amazing. They really are.
Yes.
He's like my yellow lab of my snakes, basically. You know?
They are like the perfect, besides size wise, if it's too big, but if you get a smaller, a locality, it's like the perfect, it's better in my opinion than a ball python, just because you have an animal that's very inquisitive and they're so slow and calm most of the time that they're perfect.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And so let's see, I had the Florida king, then the spotted python, then the desert king. Then my fourth animal was my green tree python, and that was my dream animal as a kid. I've always loved arboreal snakes, just green mambas, and blue racers as a kid, because I mean I had a nice big enclosure that they could climb trees and do all these amazing things. So the green tree python came forth, and then I bought the Thai Bambi rat snake, and then Idris came in, my boa, Idris al-Boa. And he was the first one that was raised in a tub. And so I went to this other local pet shop. I mean, you could see that they were trying to, do the care that should be done. Because we've had a few good pet shops around here lately where they really are trying to give them naturalistic, they're trying to communicate that to, hey, this is a way to keep them, not necessarily in a tub. But they do have tubs there too, because they're breeders. They're breeders that have opened up a store. So conditions say, 50-50, but I would check on this animal, and I loved him because he looked like he was more of the Hog Island locale. He had very pinkish undertones, and he had this really beautiful, like chocolate peanut buttery coloration. I love his pattern. His tail's really bright and beautiful when he, sheds. So I got him, and then the last animal, I wanted a jungle carpet. It was another dream animal that I'd never kept before. But space right now is a premium, right? And I'm still working full time. So I ended up getting a ball python morph just about a year ago, almost a year, coming up on a year. And so that's it. So that's the 7 I have. And all the names I try to keep like where they're from almost to a degree. I do it. Like my spotted python is Olivia Newton-Don. But she's from Australia.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
and so the enclosures behind you, maybe you could walk us through like those two. They look large. What do you have in there, and maybe the dimensions?
So yeah, they're 4x2x4. My boa is in that one, and then the other one back here is my green tree python. And that was a project that I had because I had, I wanted to put them. I wanted to put them in different enclosures than what they are, because I was going to do a project, and show why you should, if you have the time, wait and be patient for a really super what you want for your animal. So these were kind of projects, and these are very heavily fortified, modified 4x2x4 enclosures. I took a lot of the things that I learned over the years and put the application to these things. They're beefed up, reinforced enclosures. They're dubia enclosures. But they're not dubia enclosures because I reinforced the sidewalls with wood panels.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done a lot of different things to them so that, you see, you can't really see it from here, but there's wood trim, and I did a lot of staining and different stuff like that. And to save room, to give them more space, because I've done naturalistic backgrounds. I went with a 3D print just because it gave me more space. Now I still have like some ledges and different things incorporated into them where I spray foamed and, created the escape for them. But I was going to, I had this project in my mind, like the amount of time I spent getting those together, just get, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Just wait and get exact, because I'll be honest. I mean, I think the work I put into them, they should hold up, but I don't really know compared to the other enclosures I have. The other enclosures I have, I know they're 100% bomber, but I was going to do we'll get to that, I guess.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
This project that I had in my head,
Okay, well, I want to talk. I want to hear about that for sure. Before we talk a little bit more about just the reptile keeping, you also had a stint at Custom Reptile Habitats, another one of your jobs.
Yeah.
where you were working there. And actually, you have built at least a couple of the enclosures that are behind me.
Yep.
You were the one that put them together.
Yeah.
So how long did you work there? The best part about providing high-quality reptile husbandry is you get to develop a long-term relationship with your animal. Meet Jackson, my 18-year-old crested gecko. Jackson lives on the BioDudes Terrafauna substrate, which is one of their substrates that's specifically designed for warm biomes and humidity spikes. Like all other BioDudes substrates, it contains organic content to help support the plant life in Jackson's vivarium. It also holds moisture very well, which means humidity is never an issue, even in my dry climate. Another favorite of mine is the BioDudes Bug Grub. This is a supplement powder made from natural ingredients like carrots, beets, spirulina, oats, and potatoes. Everybody knows how important gut-loading feeder insects is, and this simplifies it for me and allows me to be confident when I feed both Jackson and my tarantulas that they're getting the nutrients they need to thrive. Also, if you have a lot of babies right now, this is a great way to help fortify the diets of neonatal reptiles. The BioDude has a ton of great educational content on both his YouTube channel and the website, all about bioactive care, and it's just one of those brands that's doing their part to push herpetoculture into a positive direction and give reptile keeping a better name.
About a little over a year.
Okay.
A little over a year. So I was with the pharmaceutical company the financial company, working from home. And it was good because I could take care of my animals while I worked. I was right there. And like I said, I'm very hands-on. I mean, I'm like a habitual mister. And I even have misting systems set up, but I sometimes don't even trust it. Like I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm like turning on the mister manually because I want to check to make sure everything's set up. But so yeah, I needed a upgrade for my Florida King by this point, and I knew I was going to a much bigger enclosure. And I upgraded him probably way before I needed to, but I knew what I needed to do to make him feel secure and comfortable, so that he would thrive. And I started, researching enclosures, what I was going to go with. And lo and behold, I mean, I stumbled upon, Paul's business, Custom Reptile Habitats. And then I was like, holy crap, they're like 5 miles, 10 miles from where I live. Like I had no idea they were local. So I went ahead and put in my order, went in for a Evolution. It was a 1.0 version, it has a support bar in the middle. And so, waiting for that to come in. And then when I went to pick it up, I had talked to Paul a couple times on the phone, about the enclosure and everything. When I went to pick it up, he helped me load it into my car. And we proceeded to talk about reptiles for 3 hours.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right? As well as I do. And I mean, we're in the parking lot, and I said to myself, I've got to come work for this guy, and I expressed interest in that, and I stayed with it. So he goes, yeah, well, I think you'd fit in good with the customer service type aspect. You have a lot of experience in that. And, we're talking. And so the minute a job opened up there, it was not for that. It was for production. Some of the jobs I'd held at a younger age, I worked in warehouses, not quite production, but I worked in a beer distributorship where you're loading trucks and doing different things and putting together orders and stuff. So I applied for the production position, and he was kind of shocked. He's like, I didn't think you'd be interested in doing this. I mean, because it's hard work. It's pretty good labor. But I said, Paul, I don't care if I'm mopping your floors. This is where I want to be. So I took a chance on me, and every day it was funny because the hiring manager at the time, he's like, he was surprised I kept coming back for the working interviews, and they'd have me do different things. So it stuck, and I started building enclosures there. And then eventually, I worked my way to the front with Paul and Jessica, and was doing the customer service end of it. And then we were doing a period where we were doing the custom enclosures. I don't think he's doing that at the moment. Where we're building an actual customization type thing, but that's where you came into play. And then I remember we did do a conference with you, and that's where we got what you wanted, at that point in time. So yeah,
that must've been like 2020. Oh yeah. 2022ish, I'd say, something like that.
Yeah. I think it was like just the start of 2022.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's cool. And then you also had a hand in the snake discovery build off. Like you helped with that. And
Yeah. Again, there was a lot of great opportunity that Paul gave me, and I'm forever grateful, for that. It was a wonderful experience. So he took me to the second build off. And so I got to go up there, and, met a lot of the YouTubers, really, really wonderful people. And that was a great experience that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, And I've been at that point, I'd already been watching like a lot of the YouTube folks. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Really wonderful experience. And that is an amazing facility.
Oh yeah, I need to get there myself. Yeah, I've heard it's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
cool.
is for sure. Have you followed much of the Enclosure Build Off?
Oh yeah, I've watched them when they come out. Yeah, yeah, it's fun.
It is fun. It is a lot of fun. And I mean, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say it. Has always been my approach. And I don't have anything bad to say. I just do find it interesting. And I will say this: if you watch the first one and you watch the last one, and you do watch the ones in between, we use the word anthropomorphism a lot, right? Um, and people can kind of twist that to what they want it to be, but it's pretty much one thing. I mean, it is projecting yourself onto animals or a deity, is by definition what it is, right? But if you watch the first one, there's been a lot of incredible enclosures that have been built with that. And some, as you can see, not so much. But I find it interesting because the one who won, the first one, which was Garrett, you remember that?
Yes, from Reach Out Reptiles. His was more like it was kind of like the interior of a barn almost, right?
Oh, it was phenomenal. And
Yeah.
so, but okay, it definitely has the human element because it's the inside of a barn. Now, anybody that has gone, you have, I have, Garrett has, as kids, we've gone herping. I used to spend sometimes a lot of trip out in Zanesville, Ohio, because we had relatives that had a farm out there. And lo and behold, I mean, I loved it because I'd go out in the barn and I know I'm going to find either a racer or a rat snake really quick.
Yeah.
Because they love it. I mean, they're on the prowl, they're keeping the pests away, And that's the thing. Like, that enclosure is perfect. It's not just the enclosure was built in mind still for the animal very heavily, even though it had the human component in it. Somehow that incorporated to Star Wars themes and a lot of these things that when you look at them, yeah, they're cool, but are they really super high functioning for the animal?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point.
I feel
I
like
know what you mean.
Misinterpreted to a degree.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There is in some ways it's almost a gateway to open up towards more like thematic enclosures, which are I've never loved. Like it's just, sometimes people will make like a little house with like a little bed and all these different things with like the bearded dragon. It looks like a dollhouse or something like that. I've never been a fan of that. Where Garrett's enclosure was a place where you could naturally, quote unquote, find a rat snake or anything in that sort of environment. It's like the exact thing, and he did it in a way that it still had enrichment and everything else. And it was, I mean, you could talk about Lori Torini's enclosures as well, for that matter, right? They don't look natural, but they have elements that the animal will use and tunnels and things like that that are, it doesn't look like a slice of rainforest, but there's a ton of enrichment in there.
100%.
I haven't seen a ton of the Star Wars things, but I can imagine what you mean.
There was one that was there when I was there, and I don't know how they didn't get in the top 3. They should have been. That was Elle from Elle's Reptiles.
Okay, yeah.
I'll try to send you a picture of that one, and it didn't. It should have been in the top 3, in my opinion. Garden State won that year. I was there, so I got to meet. And then Christine. Anyway, I got to meet them. Casey, yeah. So I got to meet them, and they won. And then hands down, their enclosure was amazing. I mean, it was gorgeous. And then Adam topped in that year, Adam Wickens, and his enclosure was amazing, beautiful, super highly functional, exactly what the animal would want. But then the one that snuck in there, I think, was a Star Wars themed, and it was kind of cool. It had a fogger, but it was very flat, very barren. It had cool elements, but I thought, what would I put in there? Isopods, maybe.
Yeah. Like a tarantula or something.
Or maybe a tarantula would be, okay, I'll live here, But if you look at, and I told Elle this, and then her husband, Dennis, I said, I wish I had that enclosure. I wish I could build an enclosure that looked like that. And I mean, I love my enclosures, but like they did such a good job. And in my mind, they said they built it for a king snake. It was perfect for a black king snake, not nigritas, but nigra, the eastern black king snake, which a lot of people aren't really technically aware of, but perfect for that. Because I used to catch them down in Kentucky a lot, but it didn't make it. Something else kind of snuck in there, and then the following year, it was kind of even more of that.
Yeah.
But I would say this past one ended up pretty good. It looked like the finalists were Did you see Garrett's in this last one?
I have
It was
no. I'm sure I have, but I can't picture it on the top of my head.
it was really good. It wasn't an enclosure; it was more of a PlayStation. So it was more of a enrichment apparatus, so that you
That's
could let
cool.
your animal come out. It was really pretty, really pretty.
Awesome.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
it is
that's
cool. It's cool to watch people innovate and come up with ideas, and
yeah,
it's just trying to push to. But you like you said, you do want to keep the animal's function in mind when you're
yeah,
designing something like that.
absolutely, absolutely. So
Well, why don't we wrap up with some of the herpetoculture topics that I know we wanted to discuss today as well. And one of them you had raised was whether or not you think, it's something we've talked about on the podcast before, but whether or not these animals that we're keeping are becoming domesticated or can become domesticated in the future. What are your thoughts on that topic?
yeah, well, Lori comes to mind immediately with the research that she's doing and the behavior that she's working with snakes. I don't know. In my mind, I'm thinking this is an animal that's pretty much born knowing it's coded. It knows exactly what it needs to do from the time it's hatched. It doesn't really need the nurturing of the parent. And what's interesting is like in the avian world, I don't know, like because I don't know if chickens really need their parents to help them because the chicks seem to just go out and forage. They are in their parents' protection, maybe. Kind of
Yeah,
like maybe
yeah, protection, but they're not feeding them like you would see other birds do, like sparrows would feed
exactly.
their young. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I find that to be very interesting, and I don't have an explanation for it, but it's just an observation. But looking at what Lori does, I mean, is she in a way domesticating snakes? I don't know because we a lot of the conversations that you've had with a lot of people is exactly that, like with Phil. Um, what is it? Are we giving? Like we can tie a lot of different things in that breeding. And like I see my king snake out every spring, and he's very restless, and he's constantly moving around. He's on the prowl, and I know what he's looking for.
Yeah, my boa is doing the same thing right now, and you just feel a bit bad for them, right?
Yeah, and I want to offer that as an outlet. Like I'm like, hey, I have a stud. If anybody wants, just
Yeah.
to give him that enrichment that I know he probably would benefit from. Um, but at the same time, do we do that for our dogs and cats? No, we kind of do the opposite, and we
Yeah,
actually take
exactly.
it a step further. But at some point, they're having that desire. I mean, my yellow lab, for crying out loud, even he was neutered, but that didn't stop him. If there was a female that wasn't spayed and she was in heat, he embarrassed me on occasion.
Yeah.
Because we would take our dogs to the climbing gym, and all the dogs would be running around, and I thought, why would you bring your dog to the gym when there's other dogs there and she's in heat? But anyway, that's a whole other story. But I don't know if I mean, with that aspect of snakes and like how they're born, I don't know if they can be domesticated. I know there was a monitor guy that was using his monitor to hunt. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Yes. He
I can't think of his
I forget
name.
his name, but he basically he's like a mink, not a mink. Well, he had a
Mink.
Mink Man, I think his name is, or
Yes.
something like that. And so he would take his dogs and mink actually to
Mhm.
farms and whatnot to rat the property. And you have like
That's
Jack
it.
Russell Terriers and little things, little dogs that do that. But then he was also training. I think it was an Argus monitor to
It was
do
an
it.
Argus monitor.
And
Yeah.
I don't know how it ended. This was years ago. I remember seeing this. I don't know if it actually worked.
Right. It was at least 2 or 3 years ago, if not a little longer. You're right.
Yeah.
So if we think about it in a way, I mean, that's a little bit of a form of domestication in a sense. Um, but in my mind, I mean, domestication means, like cattle where the interaction with human, where you're like a team, you know, you think of a canine unit in law enforcement.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
it's teamwork. Horse and a cowboy, it's teamwork. Um, that's more in my mind with domestication. Now well, see, here's the other thing. I love Lori a lot. I watch her channel a lot. I've learned so much from her regarding behavior. I even did target training a few of my animals. And I haven't really done that now. I mean, I don't know. I just had this started thing. I thought, well, it's such a complex thing, really, wouldn't you agree? Like if we think about
Totally.
what these animals need. So, okay, let's say I start target training them. They're not getting target trained where they live in the wild. And all the animals I keep, with the exception of my green tree, which full disclosure, he was a farm hatched.
Okay.
So, and I purchased him I found him through Morph Market. And I talked to the owner of the pet store down there, and I can't remember his name. At the time, I think it was Cold something. So I kept an eye on him. He wasn't very well established. I think he'd only eaten 2 or 3 times before they released him to me, which the green tree python world would say that's an absolute no-no. But I did trust with my experience. And I, the other thing, I put him in a full bioactive enclosure right away as a baby. And I wouldn't recommend somebody do that if they're starting off with a green tree python until you build up the ability to know what you're doing. But digressing, yeah, I don't know if they can, in a sense, be domesticated like that. And should we domesticate them? So with Lori target training, is that natural? Now I get her point of view too, because when she has to handle the animals, they're not stressed out.
Exactly. It goes back to the Temple Grandin kind of stuff.
Yeah, isn't that funny how that ties together? So I mean, I would love to hear Lori's go to a class that Lori would hold regarding that exact subject with, knowing the experience that she has, the education that she has, everything that she's learned, but then everything that she's observed, what that's like. But yeah, I don't know. Are you familiar with Graham Alexander? He's
I don't think so.
I think he's out of South Africa. He did a lot of work with African pythons, which I think is the same as an African rock python. Pretty amazing. And I never knew this. Baby African pythons stay with their mom for like about 2 weeks after they've hatched.
I did not know that.
If you Google him, and there's footage out there, and he's got a camera down in her hide, and sure enough, all these babies' heads pop up, and they're in her coils.
That's cool.
Really, really interesting though. He's a major herpetologist in the reptile world, but yeah. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? Domesticating reptiles. Is it possible? Do you think it's really a true definition of domestication?
I don't think so. It's hard to say, but I don't think. I think the concept that you raised of the partnership, I think, is a good one. Like there is something about having a domesticated dog that they see you as a partner, and maybe we can't get there with reptiles. I think. I mean, you could have a positive relationship with them. They could see you as not a threat, but as a source of food or as a source of even enrichment, right? Like if an animal is very comfortable with their owner, they see you as a positive. But is it quite the same as a dog that is like going nuts when you come home? Right. And there's something about that, or even a horse, like you said, that's another good example. There's a person who owns a horse will have a really deep connection with that animal that goes beyond just I bring you food and water. There's more of a bond there than I think maybe we can get to with reptiles, but maybe not. I mean, it's really hard to say that reptiles do. They like you had said earlier, they're all capable of much more thought process and learning than we can think, and Lori's kind of proving that. But can we get them to a point through breeding and selective breeding that they're wagging their tails, for lack of a better word, that we're coming home? Right. Maybe not.
Right. No, I agree with you 100% on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting conversation. And I mean, not to mention, we've also, the captive breeding of these animals has brought them better, created a better animal for captivity as well. Animals that are just, more used to humans and right. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Another thing that you had mentioned was just the impact of social media in general on our space. And I think for you have an interesting perspective on it because you had a big gap in reptile keeping, and when you came back to it, it was like, boom, there's all this stuff on the internet that before you were getting back into reptiles, you probably weren't even aware of, right? You're like, well, there's a whole segment of YouTube and social media that's dedicated towards this. How do you interpret that? Do you think that's a positive? How does it work within our space, our community?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say yet. I mean, because I think knowing what you know, you can quickly decipher, like Instagram, for example, and you see something with an animal in it. I'm pretty sure you have the same ability that I do. You can quickly decipher that there's something not quite right about this video, and they're staging something simply for the aspect of getting likes and building up the channel to get as many subscribers as they can. That's an issue, Yeah. You didn't have that issue 25, 30 years ago, and kind of, going back just a little bit with what you were saying, like, the horse and the deep bond. And I've seen some incredible stuff that I know is legitimate, and I've seen a connection with like cows. My
Yeah.
whole opinion on cows and their level of intelligence has changed because I've seen them happy and doing a happy dance and gait. You know, when you see people who have rescued them and they have a chance to really show what their behavior and emotional capacity is like. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So there's that aspect of it. I've seen a lot of videos of elephants being trapped in ditches, and I quickly scroll through it. I mean, I see people rescuing them, which I obviously applaud that. I love that there are people that have that compassion that are going to do everything they can to save an animal. But then I'm like, where did the ditch come from? Why is it a perfectly square dug ditch? Is it a construction site? You know,
Yeah.
and how? Yeah, I don't know. You know, and I don't know I don't know to trust that or not. But then there's then if you really want to get into the dark side, I mean, we all know the Reptile channel, and most of us reptile keepers, and what awful thing that was. And there was the guy that put the animals in the glass box. I don't even
Yes.
know
Yeah.
if is he still doing videos?
I don't know, but I know what you're talking about. It's like this versus this or
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't want to see that stuff.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know. So there's that aspect of it, and then kind of just tying it all together, from sensory overload, like to the garbage in my alley and the balloons going up in the air, and and we're at an interesting phase in our world, and it's almost like, have you ever seen the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, the new one with Keanu Reeves? And there's a scene in there where John Cleese is the professor, and he says it's only when humans are at the brink will they wake up and realize, what they're doing. Because
Yes.
I say that because we're in a really interesting time, and I feel like at this point it's kind of like just getting bigger.
It's ballooning. Yeah.
It's ballooning, and
You're so right. I mean, I've had this. I was having this conversation with my wife not that long ago. Like how much of the sensory input we're getting on a daily basis is just fake. It's inauthentic, fake stuff. And like you said, there's fake videos. There's fake, like even watching commercials is watching like Dawn dish soap, and they're showing you use the soap. It's like that's not how the fucking soap works. Like that soap isn't that good, but the commercial that they're showing is like you take one wipe and all the grease is gone and it's perfect. And I'm like, why is everything so fake that we can just get away with ads and things that are it's just untrue how that product works, and everything is like that, and that carries over into social media and how people want to portray themselves on social media, or like you said, rescuing animals in a fake way to get likes. And it seems like it's ballooning and getting worse and worse, just like you said. And now you're folding in AI into that, and it's a weird place we're in. It seems like a fever dream.
I agree with you 100%. And the thing is like that's just one aspect that's ballooning out, and then you have the other aspect, and I understand, but you've got a lot of YouTube influence from major YouTubers, and they're going on a lot of trips, and that's a footprint, whether you realize it or not. And that's not just them. You've got mountain biking, climbing, you've got all these different facets, and it's more and more and more people spreading out into what were once very, very remote, unreachable parts of the planet. And so you have to understand when you're doing that, there's an impact there, whether you like it or not,
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, I understand they want to be educating people and bring awareness, on certain things and issues. But at the same time, I don't, there's I have a big question mark, a really big question mark with it, like, we hear a lot about the climate, and, like, are you familiar with William Occam? Like just the precipice of Occam's razor?
Yes. Yeah.
Where the simplest explanation tends to be the number one. And it's just with social media and all the information, it's just boom, 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 boom. I don't know if I'm right, but just an observation from what I learned in biology, like, do you really want to fix the environment? I mean, we're going this like green, quote unquote, way. Well, cut down on our use of plastics. And I have plastic enclosures. I mean, that's a little bit different than the plastic container that, Dawn comes in. Two things, in my opinion. reduce the amount of plastics, stop cutting down our rainforests, stop cutting down forests, period. But
Yeah.
is that going to happen? And you know, I get it, but tying in everything to like the disconnect from what is natural. You know, if you think about all these things we're doing isn't natural. And then what was his name? Edward Norton Lawrence, you know, like the butterfly effect. If you think about the butterfly effect and everything that we do, and that includes keeping reptiles, like everything we try that we think we're fixing. And there was a movie. Did you ever see the butterfly effect?
Yes, with Ashton Kutcher. Yeah, yeah.
Everything we try to do to fix something, and you can look at this anywhere. It balloons into something else.
Yeah.
So we just seem to can't stop ourselves. Sometimes maybe we just need to take a step back and like stop for a while and take a breath and take it all in. I know that's a very overwhelming thing. It's a very overwhelming subject. It's a very complex thing to try to talk about.
Well, like, what's that quote? It's like your solution is the seed to the next problem, or something like that, where you think you're fixing something, but really you're creating a catastrophe in some other area that you're not aware of until it's too late. And it is true. And that people utilize something like the green movement as a place to virtue signal online and do all these things. And it's like, are you actually doing anything to help that, or are you just saying it? And it goes back to that unauthentic kind of thing that seems to be happening.
Absolutely. And we could have many, many more in-depth discussions about that very topic. I mean, if you think about it, we do the exact same thing in the reptile community, right? So you've got people arguing with the Green New Deal and this, that, and the other. I know biology-wise, carbon monoxide, typically a good combustion engine does not burn carbon monoxide. It releases carbon dioxide. But I also know if there's plenty of trees and plants and forests and prairie lands, that's what they breathe. So there is a cycle, and that is more natural. Now, there's risks to drilling and all that kind of stuff, and I get that. But what do? We kind of take a PETA approach, and we're like, okay, no more of that. We're going to shift completely to all electric or battery or whatever. But do people really know what it takes to make this and where those minerals are coming from? And then the footage in Africa I've seen is not good, you know. So why can't we just seem to, to find that balance? And it's the same thing with how we keep, we have debates. How do we keep ball pythons? My ball python's in a very bioactive, naturalistic enclosure, and I'm going to keep them in that way. And then you have the other extreme where you've got the rack people and the rack systems, and I feel like we've kind of done that same thing.
Yeah, why can't we just have a normal conversation that kind of understands that both sides? You don't have to go, every car on the road doesn't have to be running on a battery, or the other opposite, everything has to be gasoline. Yeah. And with the reptile hobby, it's the exact way. There needs to be some sort of conversation, because clearly both sides cannot be right, and the extremes are always wrong. So there's some thing in between. But yeah, the social media doesn't actually help that conversation in any topic.
It really doesn't, and that's why I really enjoyed working with Paul and getting to know Paul, because he has that balance.
Yes.
You know what I mean? He would say, because I would, I'd be like, he changed my thought a little bit, because I'd be like, well, we don't need all the ball python breeders that we have. We just don't, because there's lots of animals out there, as you guys just previously discussed, and that are never going to find homes. And then what ends up happening to those animals? I mean, it's a big question. But he was like, no, I mean, they are important, because we're all connected, and they bring interest too. They offer something different for somebody new that's getting into it, that speaks to them, and that's the approach I think that he's taking, or he's trying to take. And it is, it's just a matter of finding that balance, That's why it's summer. I mean, everybody you've had, oh my gosh, DILLON, it's just been boom, 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 boom. I can't keep up with you. Summer was awesome. Rain was awesome, and I get Rain took a very complex subject, but basically it's basic kind of biology when he starts talking about genealogy. And I didn't know the difference, like what the line breeding meant, as opposed to, I still don't, a little bit. That was a very complex conversation. But a very good one. And everything he said is kind of true. I mean, really, a lot of people that breed don't want to hear that,
Exactly. People want to take shortcuts and just jump into things and not do it properly, really, at the end of the day.
And bringing it all together. Yeah, that's exactly, I think. And and trying to navigate through social media to to figure this stuff out is very, very difficult for some
It's a
folks.
minefield.
It is a minefield. It absolutely is.
Awesome. Well, John, this was a great conversation. We covered a lot of different territory here, and I think it was really an important conversation. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I yeah, I guess just, if I had anything to say, if I had any kind of influence, it would be, just my wish would be for people to become more aware, of a
Yeah.
lot of different things. But if you have a headache and you pop an aspirin in your mouth, just, appreciate that and know, because the choices you make have an impact on everybody else, whether you realize it or not. And just to be more mindful in that regard, the things that you eat, where the food comes from. I'm not saying don't eat at McDonald's, but maybe don't eat there 2 times a day, 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
mean, and that's kind of crazy. I mean, closing thoughts, I don't know what you want to do with some of them, but yeah, it's just to kind of, if I had to say, just be mindful. And I mean, that's the same thing would tie into, how we keep our animals. I mean, I don't understand, like Chad would say, I don't understand why you would want to have 1,000 ball pythons and they're just stuck in a drawer and you pull it out and look at it and like an auto part,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't understand that, but that's not my thing. So, um, yeah, I kind of lost my thought there with what I was trying to say with that.
No, I think it's good. I think just like you said, being more aware, being more, I think, conscientious, which is a word I think I associate with you, is just watching what you're doing and watching and understanding the impact that you have on whatever it is, whether the animal's life that you're having, or like you said, the things that you're utilizing in your day-to-day life that you may not be aware are associated with, an animal sacrifice, for example, but also just even how your enclosure environment is set up and how that impacts the
Hmm.
welfare of the animal. I think that all ties together with just being aware of what you're doing, and I think
Yeah,
that's a good way to wrap it up.
you kind of helped remind me, because I know every one of my animals. I know what they like. I know what they don't like. I know their behavior. I know, and I can expect to see them out. And that's because I spend a lot of time with them, and I want to know them. You know,
Yeah.
I enjoy their behavior, and I enjoy learning from them and like what they do. And I mean that's a really big enclosure, but he needs more than that. He wants to
Hmm.
come out and explore. Even my green tree python escaped. I was so lucky to recover it. And this was only about 2 or 3 months after I had him. And this tiny little green tree python, I found him halfway across my house. So
Wow.
I'm like, I've learned so much about green tree pythons, Dylan. It's nuts. And I think it was it Jacob? He said they don't do anything. I don't know how much experience he has with green tree pythons, but I don't find him boring because Verdi is unreal. He's done every behavior I've seen a boa do and a ball python do. And he's only been in this enclosure maybe, well, 3 or 4 months now, maybe 5 months. And I came in one day and I thought he got out again. And I checked everything. So I have a really big pork round, like it looks like a log, and he was hanging out in there.
That's cool.
Now, a green tree keeper would maybe freak out with that, but
Basically on the ground. Yeah.
they do, and you'll hear green tree python breeders. That's what they say. Oh, they don't do anything, and you'll see them in an enclosure that's very barren and just maybe 2 or 3 perches.
Yeah. One PVC pipe and hey, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, well, there's nothing for him to do.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I know I caught that snippet where you were going to trim your ficus. I have a ficus in there and it's just taking off, and
Oh yeah. Yeah.
it's perfect because it's growing right up into his perches, you know. So
Yeah.
I can't wait till I have to trim it. Hopefully, I'm going to try to propagate it too and get another one off of it. It's
Well,
just,
they have so much character, like the
oh, they
branching.
do
They're a great plant.
a
A
great
tree,
great
really.
plant.
Yeah.
What enclosure do you have yours in?
It's in my carpet python enclosure.
Perfect, makes perfect sense. They're pretty
Yeah.
sturdy trees,
Very sturdy.
and
Yeah.
a
They have a
carpet's a
real
big
deep root
animal.
system.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're
So
great.
yeah, and that's the thing, like I've been very strategic, and people are like, how do you keep your plants from getting mowed down? I'm like, well, I bury hides next to the plant sometimes, and I'll create dirt there for him to burrow in, but at the same time, I'll kind of try to direct him in that
Yes.
direction. But just giving him lots of choices and stuff too really helps. And I honestly haven't I haven't had the issues with them uprooting my plants and destroying them. You pick the right ones. Oh, and you've really got
Exactly.
me. You've got me on the grass kick. I've
Oh
got
yeah, yeah.
I've got grass growing in 3 different enclosures now, which I
See,
love.
it's cool. Yeah.
It looks so much more now. Oh, and you probably can't see him, but
I can see him moving around. Yeah.
he's right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm really proud of that one plant. It's a lay plant, a Hawaiian lay plant. Are you familiar with
Okay,
that one?
cool. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Looks really cool. They're native to South Central America too, a little bit. But hey, I got really kind of off topic there. But now you can see why Paul and I talked for 3 hours, because I'm sure you've had those conversations with him.
Oh yeah, yeah. We've had lots of
I'm
3-hour
sure you and I
conversations
could
with
probably
Paul.
talk another 3 hours if we needed to. But
For sure. Well, this was awesome, John. Thank you so much. Can you tell people where they can find you online, if they want to reach out or check out what you're doing?
I'm just basically doing real simple stuff on Instagram. And
Okay.
right now, our Instagram channel is Brewkeeper, and I just do, when I have time, I try to post pictures of my animals, videos of my animals doing certain things, giving them enrichments. And I've been trying to incorporate some of my builds, like how I put some of my enclosures together and stuff. It's just, I'll tell you, I really give a lot of credit to you and Liam and Ed and Emily, just anybody out there, Trish, from
Yeah.
Reptile
Reptile.
Garden.
Yeah.
It is when you work full time too, and you've got other responsibilities, trying to put something together, it's a lot of work. And I'm still
sure.
and I'm doing most of the stuff from my mobile phone. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's really hard. And I give you guys so much credit. And I thank a lot of you guys too, because I've learned so much. And that's just kind of the whole idea is,
It's a community.
Community, sharing ideas and thoughts, and being open to learning something,
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up, John. Thank you so much for being on the show. This was an absolute pleasure, and I think we'll have to do another one in the future at some point.
I would love that, Dylan. That would be an honor.
All right, that is the end of that episode. John, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. It was a fascinating story, and I think it's just an important one. And like I said through the intro, this concept of awareness and conscientiousness, I think, is so crucial that you're connecting with your hobby and connecting with the animals on a deeper level is so important. And listening to the pharmaceutical stories and how that kind of ties into everything, it's fascinating. So thank you so much. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to do me a favor, the easiest thing you can do is share it on Instagram, social media, however you like. That really does go a long way. You can also comment on Spotify now as well. So if you have any comments about the episodes, feel free to do that. And for those of you who don't know, you can watch it on Spotify too. If you would like to join us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. There you have early access to episodes and the opportunity to submit questions to upcoming guests, as well as have instant access to the Discord server and talk to other listeners as well. If you're looking for more information on the podcast, you can head to animalsathomenetwork.com. Make sure you go check out magicmind.com/animalsathome for up to 48% off your first subscription order for the next 10 days using the coupon code animalsathome20. Thank you all very much for listening to the episode. I will catch you in the next one.